So let's start. Hello, everyone, and welcome. Thank you for joining this session tonight. I'm Avni, the founder of Warriors Connect, which is a fairly new peer support community for those diagnosed with various mental health conditions and their caregivers. So in case this applies to you or someone you know, please feel free to reach out. My contact details are on your screen. And I would just like to say that here at our community, we empathetically support each other. We share our experiences, our ups and downs, but we do not offer professional advice. So peer support goes a long way in aiding recovery and healing. However, it is not a substitute for medication and therapy. So we are here today to speak about the latter with our guest, Manisha Sharma. Manisha is an experienced counseling therapist. She has a master's in clinical psychology and she's trained in cognitive behavioral therapy, couples therapy, hypnosis, and so on. On a more personal note, she has counseled me extensively and I've definitely benefited from it, which is why she's here today on my special request to talk to us about therapy, how it all works, and advise us on how we should let it work for us. And Manisha right now is full-time employed in a leading organization. She's creating wellness models for content moderators, which essentially means that she's really dialed down her private practice, and it makes her ideally suited to offer unbiased, candid opinions today. So we're really looking forward to that. Welcome, Manisha. Thanks a lot for agreeing for this. So before we get into the thick of things, Manisha, it'll be great to hear some opening remarks from you.
Thank you so much for inviting me. And it's actually an honor. And like you rightly said, it does give me an opportunity to give an unbiased opinion. Not that even if I was in private practice, those who know me from before here would say that I would still give an unbiased approach, even if I was in practice. But yeah, definitely, right now, since I'm not taking any new clients, this definitely would be very, very to the point, crisp, and not really a marketing thing, which a lot of times becomes what it looks like when professionals are talking on platforms. So thank you so much for inviting me. It's honestly an honor to be here and be able to talk to you all and promote therapy as a practice.
So Manisha, let's do this. I'll ask you some broad questions and you lend us your perspective. And once we're done with this little to and fro, we'll take up questions from the audience, right?
Definitely. Sounds good.
And guys, everyone who's hearing this, please feel free to post your questions in the chat box. And it'll be nice if, as many of you can turn on your video. I think it really does help the speaker. That'll be nice. Okay, then let's start. Firstly, Manisha, what is your advice for folks like me who have been to therapy, probably benefited from it? What perspective should we have going forwards? Like, should we think of ourselves as successful? Or, sometimes we tend to drop out when we think we're more stable. So what do you have to say to that?
So I think, Avni, specifically, yes, like therapy is not like a constantly ongoing process throughout. Like it's not going to be something that you start and you have to meet your therapist throughout the rest of your life. And I think most of the therapists, when you go to them, they would definitely inform you that this is going to be a collaborative process and that mutually both you and your therapist could sit down and discuss and terminate therapy at a certain point when you would have felt that you've benefited. So I definitely do recommend that instead of dropping out suddenly, it would be best that before, closing on therapy or terminating therapy, one should consult, discuss with the therapist analyze if all the goals have been met that we were trying to seek out of therapy, and then from there take it on, right? Like, take a break. I usually tell people that, whenever you need to come back, and because we all go through life, experience on experience basis, and a lot of times we would have situations which would demand us from us, some kind of extras, right? And we would need support from other sources than just ourselves. So even after you have completed your whole course of therapy, in the sense that you've met your targets and you've gained out of therapy what you would like, and you've terminated it, and in the future, let's say a few years later, a certain situation comes in, you can always go back to your therapist, but speak to them, close it on a note where, both of you are absolutely clear that you have achieved the goal that you started with.
Okay. I mean, frankly, I did not know terminating mutually was an option. So
Absolutely.
thanks for that. I've never reached that stage, so I wouldn't know.
So, but then we did like make it. We've come to that point where, you are usually reaching out to me in a time or space where you basically need support. But I do see there've been immense progress, and that you have reached to this point surely out of your own dedication to the process, I think, and that is extremely important in the whole course of therapy.
Thank you. And what do you think we should feel, like, should we give ourselves a pat on the back or something?
Absolutely.
I'm not saying this from a personal perspective. It's just that we spoke to a few members and there was this discussion that it's not just the therapist who was good. You had an active role to play too. So
I would actually say that more than the therapist, it's your role that is more important and more relevant, because all the therapists would be trained on the same subject, right? Like if you go to a person who has similar degree as mine, they are also taught the same thing that I've been taught, right? Of course, all of our way of working and style of working may be different, but we know certain things, or we've been trained into things in a similar manner. But a lot of it depends on how, the whole process is being received as well, right? So I completely give the credit of a successful therapy relationship to the client more than the therapist, right? Because we know what we're supposed to do and how we're supposed to lead this, right? But I think the client doesn't know, they're still exploring, and it is completely, if they are not invested in the process, we would not get the result however well qualified a therapist is. So even if you go to somebody with an MPhil or a PhD, right, they would still be, hands tied down if the client is not contributing and supporting in the whole process. So it completely depends on you, and if the therapy is successful, you deserve to pat your back.
Avni, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yeah.
I had a question. Should I bring it on later, like you said in the chat box, or can I ask right now?
I think it'll be better if we can take it up later, Anisha, if that's okay.
Sure.
Put it in the chat box, because multiple people might have similar questions, so we would like to collate it. Yeah.
Sure. I'll do that.
Okay, thanks, Atan. Okay, thanks for that, Manisha. Now, actually, my second question is like the elephant in the room, right? I'd like you to address, those who have tried therapy, but unfortunately not benefited from it so far. And, I was in that category too. You were the fourth therapist that I had tried to meet. And, we ran a small little poll on our community also today, and it turns out that from whoever answered, nobody got it right in the first go. And around 71% got it right after trying more than 3 times. And like several who have been in therapy say that it meets around 65% of their expectations. So, how does one keep on trying on and on with this hope that one day we may get lucky? It's frustrating and disappointing.
Absolutely. I agree with you. I've had disappointing experiences myself. So I can definitely say that, we may not always find the right person in the first go itself. Some of us do, some of us don't, right? So it completely depends on, what we are seeking and how we are actually, what is the kind of rapport we are establishing with the therapist what the therapist is also establishing with us, right? So let me tell you like a few steps that we need to keep in mind. So the first step you've already taken, that you've decided to take therapy, right? You've decided to seek out for therapy. Now the second step is to do your own research in terms of what is it that you are looking for, and based on that you do your research as to, let's say for instance, if somebody has to has a clinical diagnosis with them, right? So the best advice anybody offers is that you seek out a person who's a clinical psychologist. You seek out a clinical psychologist, right? But unfortunately, like some of you would have, and I suppose happened with you, Avni, as well, that sometimes you may not get the right results from a clinical psychologist as well, right? So the first thing is stay open, and then move on to looking at the person's career chart, like look at what their qualification is, look at the kind of trainings they have got. Are those kind of trainings going to be supportive into the process that you are going to be following for your particular concerns, right? And even if people have same diagnosis, they may not have same concerns. That's important to understand. So not the same therapist that may have benefited one person with the same diagnosis would be able to help the other. So have that understanding. And in the first session, so when you book your first appointment with a therapist, try to understand who they are, what they do, how long they've been doing it. So it's more like, as much as they are interviewing you, you are also allowed, or supposed to rather, interview them, right? And check with them, after that first session, if you think that yes, this person is probably the one that I am looking for. Don't just think that, okay, if the second session didn't go well, maybe that's not the right person. Give it about 3 more sessions for you to be able to understand if you and the therapist are able to address the same concerns in the desired manner, right? And most importantly, and this I've been practicing since the time that I began, that even if a person tries to drop out, let's say after the first session, right, maybe they didn't find the connect, or they didn't find what they were looking for with a session with looking for in a session with me, I usually would drop them a message or give them a call and tell them, please don't give up on the process, because what is important is the process, not the person here, right? So look, and it's like very, very simple, that whenever you want to settle down for something, like even if you're making a major decision in life or a course that you would want to do, you would want to know why you're doing this, right? So that why is extremely important in therapy also. Why do I need or want to go for therapy? What is it that I'm looking for? Make a list of it. And then when you look out for the person, you see if this person would be able to meet that. And then the third and important element is forming that connect. So if you're able to form that connect with the person, if you're able to form that genuine interaction with the person, then I think that is something that is going to be helpful for you.
Okay, that's a lot of points in there. If I may, comment on a couple of them just to sort of synthesize this, put it together. I think, doing that research bit, that, why do I need therapy? What am I really looking for? Will this person, in terms of qualifications, etc., training, blah, 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 will they be suited to me or not? I think ideally this is great. One should do it. But very often one is desperately trying to seek out therapy when they are not in a state to do any of this. They just like want to talk to someone, right? And they want to find that someone. And I think what's really important is that what you said, the first appointment, you have to treat it like an interview for your therapist, because otherwise the natural thing to do is to just go and vent, and just keep talking yourself the whole time, and not let the therapist speak. I don't know if I'm speaking for everyone, but I think this happens pretty often. So what you said, like around 5 sessions or so, give a therapist around 3 to 5 sessions, seems like a good idea. But yeah, what do you say to people who are really in the thick of things, and it's not like they're in their best state to do a lot of research?
I think yes, Avni, like you said, that let's say when they're making this decision to seek out for therapy, as per the example that you just shared, is basically in a situation where they're desperately in need of venting out, or talking to someone who could hear them out, right? And that absolutely is fine, right? That is, you seek out for a therapist who's available and you do it, right? But again, you don't have to establish a kind of a commitment through that session, right? We all therapists are trained into that, and a lot of times, in my experience, what I have experienced so far in about 7 years time, is that usually people would want to drop out after that venting session. That has happened a lot of times. So basically, they were really not looking out for therapy. They were looking out for a session where they could vent. And I think that does the so you reach out to someone who is qualified, who is a counselor or a clinical psychologist. You vent it out, and then you find more clarity after that session. And then you sit down. Would I want to go ahead with this person again? Right? Then you can, once you vented it out, it actually will clear a lot of things for you emotionally. And then you can sit down and decide on a serious note for therapy. Right? And I always say this, like I've said this to you, and irrespective of someone's diagnosis, right? I think all of us in today's time, we do need therapy, right? Like whether it's a trained psychologist like myself or someone else, we all, therapy is basically a process that can be utilized for different things and not just for diagnosis. So consider it that. Now when you have a diagnosis, then you definitely must consider it, because it is more like, medication and therapy should go hand in hand for better results, right? Because a lot of our concerns basically arise not just because of the brain chemical imbalance, but also because there is a certain personality that we have developed through, from the time we started as a child up to now. So our environment has contributed in it, and then our coping mechanisms have contributed in it. Our coping mechanisms sometimes end up becoming our personalities, right? So without having a therapist to support you in the process, while medication is helping you with the balancing out the salts and the chemicals in the body, therapy is helping you understand, identify certain coping mechanisms which are now not serving you and need to change, and they're doing the hand holding for you, right? So once you do have a diagnosis, it is very, very important that you reach out for therapy, or plan for it, on a very serious note.
Right. Okay. Thanks, Manisha. This actually does take us to the next question. But before we go there, I wanted to again, like for the audience, stress on that matter of connection. And the connection, I think, as you said, Manisha, all, like every diagnosis, like same diagnosis does not mean same concern. Just because one therapist worked out for me, I have bipolar disorder, doesn't mean it will work out for another peer of mine who has the same concern. I think that's really important to keep in mind, because people keep on trying to ask each other for references, and I think we should kind of take it with a pinch of salt. It's nice to have referrals, but don't expect that is going to work brilliantly for you just because it worked well for someone else. And I think, for me, for example, even in the first meeting when I'm interviewing the therapist, some of the connection part comes in when you can just feel, okay, you don't like the way the person talks. Maybe they're too fast, or maybe they're too slow in the way they speak. Something as small as this can make a difference, I think, in the connection. Okay, so we may take questions on that later. So I'll go to another very important thing, and you have actually covered some of this already. We would like to seek your advice for all those who haven't tried to seek therapy yet. And there can be various limitations to it. You can touch upon those. However, one important limitation, I think, is just simply inertia, because that it is a difficult process to go about finding someone which will suit you. It's like a match made in heaven sometimes, right? So how do you gather that energy to just start? Where do you start? How do you do it? Can you offer us something? Yeah.
Sure. So I think, yes, like you said, there could be a lot of reasons to why somebody is not seeking out therapy. One of them can be inertia as well, that, because they've heard from so many people that it's a difficult process and so many people have failed several times, and the whole energy that it would require for them to put into this, especially in case when we have certain diagnoses which actually make our brain works so fast that our body does not have any further energy, right? So I think we have to understand that in those cases, uh, you know, uh, inertia is going to be something which is natural, a normal thing to experience, right? And I think a lot of us, and not just people with diagnosis, sometimes without diagnosis also, because there's so much of mental stress. Like I told you, you need to do research. Now people may not be in that frame of mind, like you said, sometimes that they would be in a position to do the research correctly. In that situation, it's always good to seek out for help, you know like like you said, that some people ask for references from the peer supports, right? However, sometimes, let's say, people do not have any support, or they do not trust the new people that they have met, right? But there must be somebody, maybe in your friend circle, in your family, who you would trust, seek out for their help, right, in terms of searching out for a person for you. And like I said, first go, you may not click with the therapist. It may happen. So you need to also emotionally prepare yourself, right? That it might just be like, you might not click with the same person, like you said, it's match made in heaven. So even when you're going to seek out for a relationship, or a partner for yourself, you might not just click in the first go, if especially if you're going for an arranged process, right? So you'll meet multiple people. Does not mean that people will give up on the whole course of this, right? So we know we have to keep in mind, we have to stay focused. What is our end goal? What is our purpose? Why are we even thinking of doing this? It is for me to be able to get some support or some guidance in terms of how I can improve a certain trait or characteristics, or how I can actually give up on another one which is not serving me, right? So the whole process of therapy, and as I said earlier, it's a collaborative process, right? So basically what a therapist would do is they'll point out at the concern, right? Let's say you said the whole story, gave them a narration, they gave you a question back at it, like, now that I heard this, is this because of this reason? And then they make you think, right? So the whole process will take time for you to be able to get the result that you want. Therefore, if you think that it's a difficult process to begin with, then you can start with somebody's referral, or ask anybody in your family or your friends to look out, research for people. But of course, give them the list. Okay, these are my concerns, right? Maybe I'm having difficulty maintaining a job. This is my major concern. I need to find a therapist who would be able to do this for me, help me with this, right? So you would need to hold somebody's hand in the process when you think you're being pulled back through the process because of inertia, or that fear of disappointment, with the whole process, right? And prepare yourself mentally that, yes, I know maybe the first time I will not get the right click.
Right. generally that's also something we end up telling people when we give the referral, right? I have gone to this person, but may not work for you. Right. Actually, Manisha, what is your take on all the various platforms which are out there right now, which are basically therapy marketplaces, right? There'll be a list of therapists available, and you can choose, right? Because often if somebody would come to me, I would not be able to refer them anybody because the therapist I went to is not taking clients anymore, right? And this happens to in various cases. Some people want therapists who, they want to meet in person. So then they are restricted to a certain region. Maybe you could talk about that too. But once they restrict themselves to a certain region or zone, then it's difficult to find somebody who has first-hand experience with a therapist in that city, in that South Delhi, West Delhi, so it starts becoming narrower and narrower. So when you can't find somebody who can vouch for first-hand experience, then where do you look? There are a lot of platforms, but how does one really, go about using them? There's too much options and not much.
Right. So yes, the options are definitely available, and you need to go with the options which are more reliable for sure, right? And like you said, honestly, I cannot comment that this particular option is more reliable than the other, right? Because there is a lot of hiccups and hurdles in those processes, right? Like I would share my first-hand experience here that so I wanted to have some consultation at with regards to my work and how I was coping with things, and I seeked out for one of the platforms, and I booked a session, and nowhere over the platform it was mentioned that a therapy with a psychologist is going to be 15 minutes. And it was really a surprise. I was taken by surprise. Like, I'm trying to open up and talk about my concerns and what I would like to be addressed in the course of therapy, and here they do not have any clarity. So one thing that I would suggest to you is, so all these major healthcare app platforms, I think they would not really be the right place in case if you want to start the process of therapy, right? They could be a good place to start in case you want to just have this one time went out session, right? And the second thing is that yes, there are a lot of other platforms which are created specifically for mental health. You may look at that, but again, do your research, read about the therapist, know what their qualifications are, know the years of experience. If they do have the options of reviews over there, you may read that and make up your mind, right? Or in terms of the limitations with regards to in-person and online session, honestly, if you remember, Avni, when you started, when we had met in Basant Kunj, and I was also at that point in time not providing online counseling because I was myself not sure how well it would be for my clients to be interacting. But honestly, with a lot of clients, because I stayed about 2 years or so on in this online model due to COVID, as well as some of the clients who started the online therapy with me because they didn't want me to refer them to someone else at that point in time. I was going through the online sessions, and it is not really as much a hurdle as it seems in terms of the process of therapy, right? Because yes, maybe I would not be able to see the whole body language from the camera, but I can still see your expression. I can still figure out if you're feeling uncomfortable physically while you're talking about something. So it's not that major a hurdle, frankly, if you would want to. But yes, some of us will not feel comfortable unless we've met someone in person when we're trying to establish rapport with a person, right? So in that situation, see if go by Google has been a blessing now in these times, right? So look out for the person, read all the reviews, right? Sometimes you might get a very bad rating for a good therapist also, while you'll get a good rating for a bad therapist also. So I'm not saying you go by the rating alone, but when you're doing the research, read out about people's experience and see what seems more genuine and honest in that situation, right?
Definitely, I'm all for online therapy. But yeah, that's still just me. With regards to the platforms you were mentioning, just as a clarification, the huge platforms which are aggregating like huge lists of therapists, that might be sometimes problematic. And if at all, we should look at the duration of the session that they're offering, right? Offering very short durations doesn't make much sense.
Actually, a lot of them are not disclosing whether it's short or not, so that's problematic.
Okay.
Right. So I had this experience with one of the leading platforms which provides all of this, right? They provide medication, they provide doctor consultations online, they provide diagnosis links and all of that. So I'm talking about those platforms, and there are multiple of them. But then there could be platforms which are very specific to mental health alone, right? And they would probably have more details mentioned on it. And if you feel that, yes, maybe you've not been able to figure out the right information through the web page or through the application portal, then reach out to them over a call. First, understand what it is all about, and then commit to something.
Okay, okay. So there are these online counseling, so websites which are only and only focused on online counseling with a limited set of counselors, right?
Right.
Those
Absolutely.
kind of options. Okay. And for people who have financial constraints, do you have any recommendation?
Yes. So with regards to financial constraints, there may be certain organizations, like we have one called Sanjeevani in South Delhi, and I think they are providing free counseling sessions. And there are a lot of therapists who do pro bono sessions on certain days. But again, you may not know of it, like, because obviously it won't be advertised anywhere. So it again comes down to the network and getting to know. Also, another point is, like when you were saying that sometimes if let's say your therapist is not taking new clients, or any other therapist that who's working regularly with people, but they're not taking new clients, or they do not have the bandwidth to do that, you could possibly ask them for referrals, because they would be a better person to be able to tell. I'm not guaranteeing that they would be able to direct you to the best person, because as I said earlier, even if we are trained in this with the similar subjects and the by the same teachers, we may have different approaches, right? So maybe, but they could actually do their own research and support you, and that's what usually most of us do, right? That we would go ahead and talk to our clients, sorry, our other colleagues, who would be able to give us some recommendations.
Okay, okay. Thanks, Manisha. Thanks a lot for all of this. Let's now take up some of the questions that are coming from the audience. I'll take up one which is very important yet very basic, but it'll be nice to have you spell it out. Firstly, what are the differences between different kinds of therapies? There is cognitive behavioral therapy, dialectical behavioral therapy, etc., etc. Actually, only talk therapy, I think, has worked for me. So I don't have a very great idea on this. But how does one know what will work? Especially in that research phase, how do you know what will work for you?
Okay. So yes, like you said, that there are different kinds of therapies, and some therapies are promoted more for a certain diagnosis versus the other, right? Like you would hear a lot of people promote more DBT, or dialectical behavioral therapy, for people diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. versus cognitive behavioral therapy, which is more promoted for mood disorders, right? And then definitely there are other modalities as well. There is a solution focused therapy. Then you would have, like Avni said, that this talk therapy, in which basically it's more interaction based, and it's completely on the therapist of what kind of modalities they would apply, but in through a conversation. Like, I've applied a lot of CBT in our sessions, but you haven't done the CBT exercises at all. So so definitely your therapist would know what would work for you. Like, honestly, I've worked with people who have not been able to, who've been dealing with the severe anxiety issues, but they were not in a state of mind where they could work with the whole process of CBT, right? Like, I had a 70 plus years client some years back, and she obviously couldn't do the CBT exercises. I couldn't ask her to keep monitoring her mood and keep
Yeah.
maintaining records. But then in that situation, what apart from talk therapy, what worked for her was a bit of mixing of hypnosis into it, right? But that was very, very subtle, and I think this is a very tricky modality. So you need to be very careful about about which therapist you are going to, what is their background, even if you're choosing hypnosis as a modality to get support. Excuse me, just give me a moment, please. Sorry. Yeah, so as I was saying, that you will have to look out for different kinds of therapy models, read about them, and see what will work for you. And I think my throat has gone really bad just now, so excuse me for that.
Okay. So, are you okay? Should we continue? Okay. So I'll take some time for the next question, till then you can just sort that out. Okay. One important thing was that what is the difference between a psychologist, a therapist, a counselor? Are they different? Should one go to a psychiatrist? Because, I mean, of course, one should go to a psychiatrist, but psychiatrists also say that they offer therapy. So, what's the difference between all these, different service providers, if I may say so?
Yeah, that's a good word. Yes, definitely it is a service, so you can say it so for sure. And yes, it's very important to understand what we are looking out for, what is our key concern, right? Like, let's say, for if as a family member you see somebody is in mania, right? Like, if somebody is diagnosed here with borderline with a bipolar disorder, they would know that in mania, obviously the client, the person who is suffering from it would not be able to know. So it's a family member who would be seeking out for a professional help in that situation. And in that situation, definitely the first point of contact would be a psychiatrist, right? But let's say somebody is showing signs of depression, and of course they've never had an experience of a manic episode ever. And in that situation, we have to see what the level of the concern is, right? So if it would be in mild to moderate level of depression, the person would themselves be able to decide for themselves, and in that situation they may seek out to a psychologist before going to a psychiatrist, right? But if it is severe, again, we know the first point of contact would be a psychiatrist, right? But a lot of times when we encounter certain concerns, let's say for personality disorders, right? A lot of times people are not able to clearly tell whether this is a personality disorder. And even if you would go to a psychologist, they would take a few number of sessions for to determine whether this is some sort of signs there of this particular personality disorder, and then they would refer you to a psychiatrist to get a diagnosis, and if required, to be put on medications, right? So a lot of times, like when we know we have a diagnosis, then definitely we are supposed to, be regular with our psychiatrist. But again, the same thing can happen with people with psychiatrist as well, right? Like the first person that you go to and the first person who's prescribed medications, those medications may not work for you and you may seek out for another psychiatrist, right? So that may happen even with psychiatrists as well. But as I said, keep trying. Now, coming back to dividing who you should go for when, like I mentioned, when you have a mild to moderate kind of symptoms of a certain concern, then it's good that you seek out to a psychologist, right? The difference between somebody who's saying they are a psychologist and somebody who's saying they're a clinical psychologist would clearly be the degree there, right? So a clinical psychologist is supposed to have an MPhil degree and they're supposed to be registered with RCI. Unfortunately, a lot of practitioners we have seen that they write clinical psychologist just because they have a master's degree in clinical psychology. So you need to be sure that if you are planning to visit a clinical psychologist, you go on the RCI website, put in their name, right? And if the name pulls up, you may be sure that yes, you are a clinical psychologist. But in case if their name is not showing up there, then you clearly know that they do not have the qualification of a clinical psychologist. Then coming to psychologists again, both counseling as well as people who are trained in clinical psychology up to master's level can use the word psychologist, right? Again, for non-clinical concerns, for family counseling, for support with your relationships, right? So even if you are, for instance, let's say you're diagnosed with a disorder of any sort, and then you need to seek out for concerns with regards to, coping with the whole thing with your family, right? In that situation, you can go to a psychologist. But in case if you need therapy specific to your diagnosis, then you must first seek out for a clinical psychologist. And then moving on to people who just mentioned therapist. Now, they could be any therapist. And it is very unfortunate that we do not have so much of regulation in our country. And therefore, a lot of people get trained into modalities like hypnosis and NLP without having any background in psychology. And that's which is a red flag, a clear red flag, right? So make sure that you know that this person has some kind of understanding of psychology before you reach out to a person who's just a therapist, right? So reading about their qualifications is extremely important, right? But what is not important is that even if sometimes people would have a certain qualification, they may not be the right fit for you, right? And that can be problematic. So just be open. Like I said, if you know that somebody may not have a clinic MPhil in clinical psychology, but let's say just have understanding of it, but yes, they are still they've been able to support people, get good results, then you can go to them. But then of course, as I said, do not just blindly go by the referrals alone. Okay.
Okay. Actually, I'd like Anisha, if you're here, could you unmute and ask your question? You were wanting to ask the first question. So it was about what to do if therapists abandon you.
Yeah, because I'm asking this because this has happened with me. Because my therapist refused to treat me after some time.
Okay.
So what do you do in such a situation? Like, how is the patient supposed to react?
So Anisha, I am really sorry to hear that a professional did that, and this is absolutely an unprofessional approach. But I'm going to be honest with you that sometimes what happens is that a therapist may feel that they are not able to do beyond a certain point do any good for you, right? Like maybe their training and their knowledge restricts them and they're not able to get the desired result out of that process. And in that situation, what is best to be done by the therapist is that they refer you or recommend you to seek another professional. Like, I had done that to, one of my clients who was dealing with borderline personality, and after a point in time, I felt that maybe DBT could be a better model for her that might help her better, and I suggested her to seek somebody who specialized in that. However, this particular process is, again, has to be a mutual thing. And if this has happened with you, I'm very sorry. But of course, whatever, your feelings were at that point in time, the feeling of abandonment, the feeling of rejection, they were all valid experiences. I think any of us would have that, right? And of course, we cannot go back and question the person about this approach, but of course then that this person is a clear red flag as a therapist, that they are not really professional. And I think that's a very important point that you raised, Anisha, and I would like to talk about this also, that even for clients, you would see, like you would see red flags in relationships, you would see red flags with therapists also, right? So, and I would say disclosure is one element which is a very tricky one, because most of the people who are following the Western model of therapy would say that you should not at all talk about, your personal experiences or your personal, lives with your client. But I would say that disclosure, improportionate or imbalanced disclosure is the red flag. So either somebody disclosing too much or too little would be a red flag, right? Somebody not letting you talk at all or interrupts a lot during their initial conversations with you, that can be a red flag, right? So maybe somebody who's telling you this is what you should and shouldn't do, making it mandatory instead of, giving you that choice. I mean, of course, when we're talking, we will use that word, but you would know it also with the tone, whether they are actually, giving you a kind of a I mean, if they're just suggesting you to do something, or if they are asking you to mandatorily do something, right? Because as I said, therapy is a collaborative process. And if you think that something that your therapist is suggesting is not going to work out for you, you're supposed to, tell it to them honestly, tell them that, okay, this is probably not going to work for me, or I may not be able to do this. Can we look at another way of doing this? And being honest in therapy is extremely important. You have to be sure that you're sharing with your therapist in, without any inhibitions, right? So there's no topic which is prohibited in terms of discussion with your therapist, right? So you can talk to them about anything, about your even if you think that this is probably morally incorrect, should I talk to my therapist about it or not, it's absolutely okay. They're not actually be supposed to judge you. But if a therapist actually comes back to you and tells you, oh, this is morally incorrect, then again, that's a red flag, right? Because then they are not creating a safe space for you.
Yeah, Manisha, I'm sorry to interrupt you. I just wanted to ask you that, coming back to the point where you said that you left a patient who had borderline personality disorder, right?
No, I didn't leave them. I recommended them to seek, another model of therapy. And actually, they came back to me after like some time. But yeah, it was more like a recommendation. See, that limitation has to be there. Like if you go to a general practitioner, right, and they're not specialized in, let's say, cardiovascular diseases, right, and they do not have so much of information, they are definitely going to.
I lost you.
Anisha, am I audible to you?
Anisha, I think your internet
Yes.
might be a little sketchy, because I could hear.
I just wanted to say
Your
that I was the same thing. This is a borderline personality disorder.
your voice is breaking. Is it breaking for everyone else?
Yeah.
Okay. Anisha, maybe we'll come back to
My
you.
voice is breaking?
Yeah. We'll take it in the end then.
Sure. I can take this up at a later stage.
Yeah.
I just...
Okay. You're disappearing, so
Sure.
I'll just move on to the next one. We'll come to you in the end. Tab tak just figure out your connectivity issue. Yeah.
Yeah, or what I can
Sure.
do is probably type it at a later time over the chat box also in
Yeah.
case there's not able to hear that.
Right. So actually, Manisha, we are getting a few very specific kind of questions. But before we take that up, could you tell us about this? It's interesting. How do we handle criticism coming from a therapist?
Okay. Again, that is a red flag.
Okay.
Right. So honestly, if as a therapist, I would definitely tell a person that, maybe the problem or challenge you're experiencing with a person is generating because of how you are perceiving a situation. But that is not really criticism, right? But if I'm going to tell them, no, you're absolutely wrong and you're not supposed to be talking to them like that, then that is not really the right approach for in terms of something that a therapist should be doing.
Right. Okay, so I think we can take up a couple of specific questions. Megha over here wants to ask something. Megha, would you like to unmute yourself? But
yeah, hi.
Just 1 minute before you do ask any questions. Please understand that this is not a space where you can ask very specific advice, because Manisha is not your therapist, right?
Okay.
So please keep that in mind.
Okay. Yeah, it's just like I was diagnosed with schizophrenia, but I think a few years, like couple of years back. But can I ask a question that does lifestyle and laziness can cause problem? Because I have a mental disorder. But there are many combinations which has come up, and due to age, can the disease go further? I wanted to ask this.
Okay. So Megha, as you said that you've been diagnosed some years back and there could be multiple other complications which are not specific to your diagnosis, definitely can come up at any stage, right? So at any stage, a person with, let's say, somebody is diagnosed with just depression. Let's begin with that. I'll take that example instead of being specific. Yeah. So if somebody is diagnosed with depression and at a later time they begin to, get any psychotic symptoms, they would need a review with the psychiatrist, to look at whether this is just a mood disorder or whether we have moved into, another mental condition like schizophrenia or something else which could be related to personality, right? So anybody can have multiple disorders. Most common, most overlapping are depression and anxiety. They could be found in several disorders with personality or the brain function as well, right? So even a person with schizophrenia can have depression, a person with borderline personality can have depression, and a person with ADHD, which is a neurodivergent mental condition, can also have depression, right? And similarly, it can be with insomnia as well. Somebody dealing with a mood disorder can have insomnia as a concern. Somebody dealing with ADHD can have insomnia or to some extent, right? So, or people with schizophrenia can also have it. So, it will completely depend on the progression of the disease, and everybody's progression will vary. But what is important is, yes, lifestyle can contribute a lot to a large extent in terms of bringing about more stability and reducing the progression or the speed of progression in a certain disease, which is both for any mental disorder, or it could be of any other physical ailment as well.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Manisha, I want to be mindful of your time as well. We are here almost at 9:30, but our audience still has some interesting questions. I'll leave it up to you. Do you want to take up a few more?
I think I can take up the questions in the chat box one by one, which we have not already taken up.
Yeah.
And in case where by the end of it, if we have Anisha back, we could close with her question.
Okay. Okay. You were mentioning about sleep, etc. So one person asked, can sleep issues be resolved through therapy?
Well, actually, yes, but again, it depends. It's not that they can be resolved because ultimately it would vary what kind of concern you have. So you may or may not need therapy for it, but it is good to seek therapy in case you are dealing with insomnia along with your medication. Um, and yeah, you do not need antidepressants for sleeping or insomnia, just to clarify it as a what you would need is like in case if you're reaching out to a therapist and you only have this end goal to overcome sleep problems, go through that analysis of what is bothering you, deal with those challenges, and address those concerns for yourself, create a sleep hygiene model and strictly follow that. Sometimes doctors recommend, and instead of sleep, if it is about sleep regulation, doctors would recommend melatonin as an add-on, but of course take that only as per your doctor's prescription. And I don't think you'd get that also without a prescription, but yeah, melatonin can be helpful in this situation. So reach out to your doctor, take that medication and work with a therapist to align things, figure out what is causing or what is at the root of your concern, and then work to address it in terms of a very solution focused approach.
Okay. Some people ask something about, should I go to therapy to improve my relationship with my sibling, etc. I think, Manisha, you've answered this because family counseling and all is definitely an option, can
Absolutely.
be explored.
Even for handling criticism, like one person has asked, you should consider therapy for that if it is very difficult, and if you're very sensitive towards criticism, please seek therapy for that. It's going to be definitely very beneficial.
Right. Some other questions with respect to therapy itself were that there are different specializations within clinical psychology, right? Some people are specialized for this versus that, which you were saying that's why people recommend to other therapists. So if one is going, for anxiety, depression, etc., should we go to another therapist for, let's say, like a substance abuse disorder over and above? How do you deal with multiple psychologists?
So yeah, that's a very interesting question. You honestly do not need multiple psychologists, because sometimes maybe your therapist is trained for it, and if not, then they can recommend you to somebody who would be able to cover the rest of it. Because I think having multiple psychologists or working with the multiple psychologists at the same time can be very confusing and energy draining for you as well. So I would recommend that instead, if you think that your therapist is not trained or qualified in a certain area, which is an add-on to what you're already working with them for, then you may ask for a referral where they could transfer your case to someone who would be trained, as a whole, would be able to help you.
Right. Makes sense. Let me know whenever you reach, the endpoint. One person has asked, how many sittings does it take for a therapist to diagnose any type of ailment? So I think therapists are not supposed to diagnose ailments, but you can answer this one.
Right. So yes, therapists are not supposed to diagnose ailments, and even because, like I told you, that not a lot of therapists are even qualified as psychologists, right? So just give me 1 second, please. I don't know, maybe because I'm not talking so much for a few days now. So just got coughing. Okay. Coming back to the question. If you think, you are with a therapist, do not allow them to be diagnosing you, right? Again, that would be a red flag again. only a clinical psychologist or a psychiatrist can diagnose mental conditions or disorders. Apart from that, like for instance, I got this client who had a personality disorder, and I could figure out that they probably have those signs and symptoms. I recommended them to seek out to a psychiatrist with those symptoms and get a diagnosis before we could proceed, because that was my understanding. I'd worked with this person for about 4 months. And that's when I understood that they clearly have it. And also, just to clarify, because I'm trained in clinical psychology, I knew about a little bit about diagnosis, right? So that was the reason I could identify the signs, and I recommended them to the psychiatrist to get a diagnosis and start medication as well, because it was required for them.
Right, right. Manisha, if you want to give your throat a rest, I completely understand.
But that's okay. That's okay. I do see a few very important questions here, so let me just take up one by one. So I think after Nisha's question was Nishi's question about different kind of therapies.
I asked that one, yeah.
Okay, yeah. So how do you determine that is by understanding what the therapy is for, right? So if you know that CBT is, like I said, more beneficial for mood disorders, you go for somebody who's trained in CBT. But if you think you have issues in terms of communication, right, with your relationships, which a lot of borderline personality disorder people with that diagnosis would have, then in that situation you should seek out for DBT, right? So that's how you'd be able to address that. Then Ravi has asked if therapy is option or necessity. So as I said, Ravi, it's absolutely an option that that you can make a choice for. But I think it's important that you use therapy, because definitely it gives you better results than just sticking to medications. Sriram's question, I think Avni has already taken. So no, Nishi, not all therapists are trained in the modalities. We do study about them, like in a master's course, and even in MPhil, people would get more training in terms of diagnosis than in terms of therapy models. So we need to get specific trainings. So usually, in the hospitals that we are interning, or different other institutional bodies, they would have these specific courses, like Beck's Institute runs a lot of courses in CBT, who's the founder of the CBT model. Then, dialectical behavior model also, or REBT, those different institutions have, established courses for them, and we get ourselves trained into specific models. Again, hypnosis is something which is being very loosely taught to people nowadays, but very unfortunately in our country. But definitely there are institutions which teach it, and people who have proper knowledge should be only practicing it. All therapists would have their own specialization. So like I said, psychology is a vast field, and we may, just like doctors, we may learn about things at the basic level. So a general practitioner would know it all, but only a specialized person would be able to work with specialized cases. So similarly, it happens with psychologists as well. And not just with clinical psychologists, even with counseling psychologists. So even with some counselors are only specialized in family therapies, and some are only specialized in individuals. So it completely would depend. So I haven't read the complete question, but what I understand from it, Nishi, is that you are wondering if a senior person should go to a younger therapist. Honestly, it would not matter so much in terms of age, because they are trained. But of course, there could be concerns where you may feel that the other person is not able to understand you, and it is going to be absolutely based on the individual, and nothing to do with their qualification and age in terms of acting as your therapist. So the generation gap per se is not really a problem, but yes, there could be their own individual cultural biases and stuff, right? And that could be a problem. And again, you will have to see if, in about 3 to 4 sessions, if you're able to have that kind of connect with the person, then you should continue. Otherwise, you should change the therapist. But otherwise, if it is with the first go, you're going and seeing somebody who's much younger, and you feel, oh, I made a wrong maybe I made a wrong decision, which I have heard a lot initially. But I think that's not really a problem so much. So thank you, Gunjan. You've kind of specified it a lot, that yes, there is a difference in termination and ghosting. So thank you for that. And how many sittings does it normally take for a therapist to diagnose? We've covered that one, right? Yes, we do suffer with burnouts, Ravi, a lot. And no, I didn't suffer a burnout when I was doing my private practice, because I used to take very limited number of cases, but I did experience burnout in my corporate job, which was more demanding. And obviously, apart from the core counseling skills, I had to juggle with a lot of numbers as well. So there I did experience burnout. But otherwise, yes, those who are in, like, throughout the day taking sessions, and if they're not able to balance it out, a lot of times what happens with therapists is that, in certain situations, client expect them to take their calls beyond work hours. And if they are actually doing that, they are actually heading for a burnout, definitely. So we try and establish certain boundaries with the clients right at the beginning, right? Or otherwise, we follow a model which would not be a barrier for us to be able to support, right? So everybody will have different priorities, and the kind of model that they have set up for themselves would determine whether they are heading for a burnout or not.
Brilliant, Manisha. I think you've covered all the questions in the chat as well. So I think everyone should be very satisfied now that their queries have been handled thoroughly.
Anisha, if you're back and if you still have any questions, we could talk about it before we close.
Yeah. Hi, Manisha. I'm still here.
Yes. So is there...
Yes, I was talking about therapists being reluctant towards taking cases of borderline personality disorder.
Okay. Yes. So
and it's a pattern across therapists. It's not just one therapist.
Right. So Anisha, actually, it's actually a two-way thing. So what happens is that a lot of times, in case of somebody experiencing the borderline personality challenge, they would become emotionally dependent on the therapist. That is where the therapist has to draw a line, because we do not want you to get dependent on us, right? And which is not really healthy. So if I'm encouraging any of my clients to get dependent on me, then I'm actually not really doing good for them. I'm rather just probably just focused on, okay, let me have them. Because a lot of times, if I would tell you by the experience of many of my colleagues and seniors, that with borderline personality, some people continue with and if they're continuing with their therapist, they continue for about 8, 9, 10 years. And it's absolutely okay till the time there is a very clear boundary set between the therapist and the client. Like this client of mine that I was referring about a while ago, she was finding it very difficult, to accept the fact that I was not available at all times, or not being able to take her call, or not be attentive to her all the time. And that's where I had to set a boundary, and I became a little assertive with her at that point in time. And we continued with the session. And then after a point in time where she also started to show that probably the whole process is not benefiting her, I suggested to her that she should seek out for another therapist. And what happened then was that she felt that I was rejecting her. And again, she had like, a meltdown, and I had to then obviously support her emotionally before she's mentally and emotionally prepared to move on to another therapist, which she did at a later time. And when she did, of course, after a while, she came back to me. But we are now still like, I provide sessions to her on and off when she needs it. But she's come to a stage where she's able to look at the symptoms, look at the triggers and her reaction, and is able to prevent her reaction. So she's reached to that stage. But of course, that needs a lot of patience from her end also. And of course, I also had to set up a clear boundary with her, right? And I think it has worked better for both of us after that. So if you think that a therapist is probably trying, ask the therapist what is the reason. It is not always you, or it is not always them. It is probably the process of it, which is probably.
Manisha,
Yes, Anisha.
I'm sorry for interrupting you.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, it happened with me the other way around, where my therapist felt that I was not responding to her enough.
Okay. Would you want to like give a little bit of idea about what exactly happened? Because when a therapist is saying you're not responding to her, what did she mean in that situation? Were you not available? Were you not responding?
Like I used to get a lot of anxiety before every therapy session, and I would keep rescheduling.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't blame her exactly, but at the same time, I don't like this. And I have seen this across psychiatrists and therapists, where borderline personality disorder patients are like black labeled into these really difficult patients.
Well, honestly, it's not about the patients being difficult in that situation. It is frankly a very difficult disorder to deal with as a person who's suffering from it also, right? So, and I think it's equally difficult for you. But when there are outbursts, it's difficult for another person also to be able to help you see or find that space in that particular situation, right? Like find that rationalizing situation, scenario, right, for you. So in that situation, what happens is that, in a situation where a therapist feels that whatever they're trying to do may not be benefiting you, or you are not receiving it equally well, in that situation they would rather recommend that you probably go out and work out with another therapist. Because it happens a lot that sometimes clients get better results with another therapist than they would get with me. Now that doesn't make me that cannot make me any lesser good a therapist than the other person, or vice versa. If that's the situation, if another client comes to me from another therapist, doesn't make me a better person than them. But it's just that sometimes we work better with one kind of person and sometimes we don't, right? And it's honestly, I really want you to break yourself free from that thought that the BPD diagnosis is a difficult diagnosis and people are shying away from taking these cases because of the diagnosis, right? It's just that sometimes when they would feel that they are not being able to do any good for you, they may just tell you to seek out for someone else's help as an ethical practice. But if they are ghosting on you, then definitely that's not the right person to even seek out therapy from.
No, I completely understand what you're saying, Manisha. I'm not at all blaming you for the community.
Mm-hmm.
I'm just saying that therapists, like experienced therapists, older therapists, have outrightly said to me that we don't take borderline personality disorder patients. They are very difficult to deal with. So please find someone else.
Okay. That's very unfortunately that they're very unfortunate that they're saying this, that they're I mean, of course, as it may be, that yes, it needs a lot of emotional, dedication from the therapist also to work with the case, which has a borderline personality disorder diagnosis. But not all therapists would say no. Yes, a lot of them would say no, and that will happen with any kind of cases, right? Like some people will not take bipolar disorder clients because they may find that they are not equipped enough to be able to deal with somebody who's constantly switching in terms of their emotions, obviously specific periodically and varying on case to case basis. But some therapists just very clearly set out that okay, these are the kind of cases that I'm going to be working with, and these I would not. Yeah, like Anuj is saying that he was rejected because of bipolar diagnosis and consuming alcohol. So every therapist will have their own limitations, Anisha, and some of them, I've seen a lot of people who would be good in dealing with borderline personality disorder, and they work with clients for years. You can probably look out for therapists who specifically trained in trauma related cases, I think, because they are the ones who are more trained to deal with situations or emotionally overwhelming conditions, and in because of that they seem to be better at dealing with borderline personality cases as well.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Manisha. I think I'll connect with you personally if it's permissible to you.
Sure, Anisha, you can.
I think this has provoked other people to want to vent about their experiences with therapy. I think she has written this. Not sure if that's appropriate. Yeah, right. So, Manisha, you have been an absolute rock star today. Thank you so much for all of your insights, for answering all the questions that I had assembled and then literally taking every one of them up from the chat box. That is brilliant. I guess we could unmute and thank her. That we can do.
Thank you so much for listening.
Thank you so much, Manisha.
It's a pleasure. It was a pleasure to be able.
Thank you, Manisha. I still feel we should be able to vent.
Definitely.
I can go back for that, but I don't know if Manisha as a therapist should go back for that.
Yeah, I think Rishi, we can continue up to 10 if you guys would want to talk about something, but it'll be very difficult to read through. So if you want to talk on the mic and went out, I would be happy.
No, that's okay. Thank you so much. We'll
do it in the next huddle, Nishi. You tell me when we'll do it.
Thank you, Manisha.
Okay.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks a million ton, Manisha.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Avni. Thank you, Avni, so much.
Thank you, Avni,
for organizing this. Thank you so much.
You're welcome, guys. It's like my job now. So
no, but still, thank you so much, Avni.
Thanks to all for joining. Really happy. We had more than 20 people this time also attending. Not bad, huh? Second guest talk of Warriors Connect.
I think it's amazing.
Yeah, I think it's amazing.
Kudos, Avni. You're doing a great job.
Thank you, everyone. I think we can all call it a night now. So, thanks, Manisha, again, and hope to see you all again soon, maybe. And if there are still some people in the call who are not yet in our community, please contact me.